I used to believe there was no force stronger than a mother's love. Until that winter night, when I discovered how cold love could become. I walked into my son-in-law's home on Christmas Eve and found my daughter freezing on the doorstep, abandoned by his family. My heavy boots left a trail of melted snow as I carried her inside. And in a voice that didn't shake, I spoke 6 words that changed everything: "This is not your home anymore." The airport was buzzing with holiday chaos, children dragging candy cane balloons, lovers reuniting under fake snow, strangers laughing like they'd never tasted pain. I walked among them with a secret smile tugging at my lips. After years of Lily living in that sprawling mansion with Ethan and his perfect, poisonous family, I was finally going to surprise her. A Christmas Eve visit. Just the 2 of us, cocoa and laughter, like the old days. But as I wheeled my suitcase through Boise Airport, a strange unease settled over me. Lily always answered my calls, always. Tonight, the phone rang and rang until her cheerful voicemail chirped back at me. Once. Twice. 5 times. No answer. I told myself she was busy. Maybe baking, maybe wrapping gifts. But the pit in my stomach grew heavier with each unanswered call. That's when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Coach Carter? I turned and almost laughed. It was Daniel Reyes, my former student. Once a nervous kid bowing too low on the mat, now a tall, confident police officer. Daniel, I said, hugging him. It's Evelyn now. Coach retired 5 years ago. Not to me, he smiled, but then his expression shifted, like he wanted to say something and swallowed it instead. You visiting family? My daughter. Lily. I'm surprising her. There was a flicker, just a flicker, in his eyes. Worry. Recognition. And then it was gone. Good, he said too quickly. That's good. Merry Christmas, Coach. He left before I could ask what that look meant. And that pit in my gut, it started to feel like a warning. The Blackwell mansion was impossible to miss. It rose from the snow like a cathedral, columns, glass walls, garlands wound around golden lanterns. Every window blazed with warm light. Laughter spilled into the cold night. It was a picture-perfect Christmas, for people who had everything. And yet my hands were trembling as I climbed the steps. I raised my hand to knock, and then froze. Voices. Cruel, cutting voices from inside. That's what they call a daughter-in-law, boomed Richard Blackwell, the patriarch. A woman who can't even have children? 4 miscarriages. Hasn't she embarrassed us enough? My breath caught. Then Ethan's voice, my son-in-law. Cold. Contemptuous. She's always faking depression. If it weren't for my parents, I'd have kicked her out ages ago. The world tilted. I stumbled back from the door, the snow crunching under my boots. I wanted to believe I'd misheard. That it wasn't my Lily they were talking about. My gentle, kind, bright Lily. But then I saw her. At the far end of the porch, crumpled against the frozen steps, was my daughter. Lily. Her knees drawn to her chest. Her hair plastered to her face. Her lips pale and trembling. She was wearing nothing but a thin blouse, in 20-degree weather, shivering so violently I could hear her teeth chatter from where I stood. For a moment, the world narrowed to a pinpoint. The laughter inside. The frost in the air. The sight of my baby, abandoned like trash on the doorstep. Lily! I screamed, dropping my bag and racing forward. I wrapped my coat around her, pulling her into my arms, feeling how cold her skin was, how weak her breath. She blinked up at me, dazed and glassy-eyed. Mom," she whispered. "I'm here," I choked. "I'm here, sweetheart." The door burst open behind us. Light spilled over the snow, and Margaret Blackwell appeared, perfectly dressed, lips curved into a smile too sweet to be real. "Oh," she said lightly, as if we were intruding on a pleasant evening. "Lily just wanted some fresh air. Don't make a big deal out of it. It's Christmas." I stared at her. Fresh air? My daughter was hypothermic, and this woman spoke like we were discussing holiday cookies. Then Ethan's voice drifted from inside. Mom, close the door. Let her stay out there till she gets over it. The coat around Lily tightened in my fists. My heartbeat turned to thunder in my ears. Every instinct I'd honed as a fighter surged back, the stance, the breath, the focus. But this wasn't about discipline or sport. This was primal. A mother protecting her child. I rose to my feet, still holding Lily against me. And with one swift motion, fueled by every ounce of fury I'd buried for years, I kicked the Blackwells' front door open. The wood splintered as it slammed against the wall, and the party fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned toward me, stunned, offended, terrified. I stepped across the threshold, snow still clinging to my boots, my daughter trembling in my arms. And in a voice that didn't shake, not once, I spoke 6 words that would change everything. This is not your home anymore. The room froze the second my boot shattered that door. Crystal glasses hovered midair. Laughter died on painted lips. And there I stood, snow melting on the hardwood, my daughter's limp body in my arms, rage burning through me hotter than any fire I'd ever known. Evelyn? Margaret Blackwell's voice broke the silence first. Sweet and poisonous, like honey laced with arsenic. There's no need for dramatics. Lily wanted to step out and clear her head. That's all. Clear her head. My daughter's fingers were blue. Her breath came in shallow gasps. And this woman, this venom in pearls, had the audacity to pretend nothing was wrong.
I took one step forward, then another. Their Christmas tree glittered behind them, perfect and sterile. The scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air. Everything in that house screamed warmth and family, and yet, in the middle of it all, they had left my child to freeze alone. Put her down, Ethan said from behind his mother. His voice was flat, unbothered. She's being dramatic again. She does this every time she wants attention. I stared at him. This man, the boy I had once welcomed into my family, now spoke about my daughter like she was a stray dog ruining his party. You did this, I said, my voice low and trembling. All of you. He smirked. She's my wife. This is my home. You don't get to storm in here and... Home. I cut him off. A home is where someone feels safe. A home is where love lives. And what you've built here, my eyes swept the room, meeting every stunned face, is a prison. Richard Blackwell rose slowly from his leather chair, the weight of authority clinging to him like a cloak. Once a judge, now just a man who thought power still bent his will. Evelyn, he said, calm and patronizing. You're trespassing. I suggest you leave before this becomes more serious than it already is. I shifted Lily in my arms. She stirred faintly, her lips forming a word I could barely hear, Mom. That was all it took. My last thread of restraint snapped. I turned to face them fully, my feet planted firmly on their polished floor. No, I said, my voice slicing through the silence. You're the ones who should be afraid of what comes next. Margaret gasped. Are you threatening us? I'm promising you, I replied. You have no idea what you've unleashed. Ethan scoffed. God, listen to yourself. Always the martial arts coach, thinking you can fix everything with a kick and a speech. Newsflash, Evelyn, you're in my house. You're nothing here. I stared into his eyes. Then I'll stop being nothing. And with that, I walked straight past him. No one moved. No one dared stop me. Maybe it was the fury radiating off me. Maybe they were too shocked by the sight of a woman carrying her broken daughter out of a mansion that had nearly destroyed her. On the porch, the night air cut into my lungs. I tightened my grip around Lily and whispered into her hair, You're safe now. I've got you. Her eyes fluttered. I don't want to go back. You never will, I said. I swear it. My apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that barely fit a table, but when I carried Lily inside, it felt like a fortress. I laid her gently on the couch, wrapped her in blankets, and set a pot of cocoa on the stove. The warmth filled the space, chasing away the cold that had seeped into her bones. For hours, I sat beside her, brushing the hair from her forehead, whispering the same words over and over. You're safe. You're loved. You're home. But beneath the tenderness, a darker truth grew inside me. They weren't done with us. Not yet. I was proven right just before dawn. The sound was soft, a faint whisper under the door. I frowned, crossed the room, and bent down. A folded piece of paper lay on the mat, no stamp, no envelope. Just one sheet. Handwritten. I unfolded it slowly. Don't mess with the Blackwell family if you don't want to end up as miserable as your daughter. Give up. I stared at the words until my hands stopped shaking and started to curl into fists. Give up. They thought I would retreat. That I would crumble under their threats like so many others had before them. I crushed the paper in my fist and whispered into the empty room. They think I'll back down, but they have no idea who they're dealing with. I turned and looked at Lily, sleeping soundly for the first time in months. And in that moment, I made a vow not just as her mother, but as the woman they underestimated. This war had just begun. The snow was still falling the morning after I brought Lily home. Soft, steady, indifferent, like the world didn't care that my daughter had been left to freeze on her own doorstep. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee gone cold in my hands and watched her sleep on the couch. Her breathing was shallow but even. Her skin no longer deathly pale. Every rise and fall of her chest was a small miracle. It had been years since she'd been under my roof. Years since this apartment, my little sanctuary of books and Taekwondo trophies, had held the sound of her breathing. Now it felt different. Sacred. Like a fortress being reborn. I promised myself right then, this place would be where Lily learned to feel safe again. And anyone who tried to breach that safety would have to go through me first. When she finally stirred, the clock read nearly noon. I helped her sit up, wrapping her in a blanket. She stared at the cup of cocoa I handed her like it was a foreign object. Drink, I whispered. It's still warm. She took a small sip. Her hands trembled. For a long time, we said nothing. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, the kind that builds when words can't hold the weight of what's happened. Finally, she spoke. I'm so tired, Mom, she whispered, her voice so faint I had to lean in to hear it. No one understands. I swallowed hard. I do. I understand more than you think. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. It's like I'm disappearing. Piece by piece. You're not disappearing, I said, cupping her face. You're still here. And as long as you're here, I'll fight for every piece. She nodded weakly and curled back into the couch, exhausted again. And that's when I decided if the Blackwells wanted to make this a war, I'd fight it with everything I had. That night, after Lily fell asleep, I pulled out an old metal box from my closet. Inside were years' worth of documents, wire transfer receipts, bank statements, letters I'd sent Lily over the years. Every dollar I'd given her to help build her new life. Every proof of my support. One by one, I laid them out across the kitchen table like weapons. The Blackwells thought they were untouchable because of their money and power. But I knew something they didn't. Even the most powerful fortress has cracks, and I was going to find them. I spent hours combing through the paper trail. Dates, amounts, transactions. I highlighted every suspicious withdrawal Ethan had made from Lily's account. Every time my money had vanished into something that wasn't hers. My hands shook from exhaustion, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Around 2 a.m., I picked up the phone and called an old friend, James Whitaker, a retired lawyer I trusted more than anyone. Evelyn, he sighed when he answered. It's been a long time. I need your help, I said without hesitation. It's about Lily. It's about the Blackwells. There was a pause. A long one. You're stepping into dangerous territory, James warned. Richard Blackwell still has friends in the system. Judges. Lawyers. If you go after them, they won't play fair. They already didn't, I replied. They left my daughter to die in the cold. I don't care how powerful they are. I'm not walking away. He sighed again, heavier this time. Then we'll start building a case. Slowly. Carefully. And Evelyn, be prepared. This will get ugly. I've lived through ugly, I said, staring at the crumpled threat note still sitting on my counter. They should be the ones afraid. 2 days later, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Daniel Reyes was standing there, holding a grocery bag and smiling awkwardly. Brought supplies, he said. Soup, tea, and pie. Pie? I raised an eyebrow. Yeah, Lily always liked blueberry pie, right? I stepped aside, and he entered quietly. When he saw Lily on the couch, curled into herself beneath a mountain of blankets, the smile faltered. He set the bag down and approached gently. Hey, Lily. She looked up, blinking in surprise. Daniel? It's been a while, he said softly. I thought maybe starting small might help. Like a pie. And talking. No pressure. Her lips twitched into something that almost resembled a smile. Almost. Thanks, she murmured. But I don't think I can do anything anymore. The words broke something inside me. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were so honest. So defeated. Daniel knelt beside her. You don't have to do anything. Just eat pie. And know that we're here. Both of us. Her eyes filled again, but this time, she didn't look away. For the first time in weeks, I saw a spark, tiny and fragile, flicker behind them. That night, as I tucked her into bed, I caught my reflection in the dark window. I looked older than I remembered. Tired. But beneath the exhaustion, there was a new steel in my eyes. They had broken her once. They would not do it again. My home, this tiny apartment with its creaky floors and mismatched furniture, had become a fortress. And in this fortress, Lily would rebuild. Slowly. Painfully. But she would rebuild. And as for the Blackwells, they had declared war when they left my daughter on that doorstep. Now, the war was mine to win. By the end of that week, my kitchen table looked less like a place to eat and more like a war room. Stacks of papers. Bank statements. Old messages printed and highlighted. Every single piece of evidence I could dig up about Lily's life with the Blackwells. I had spent sleepless nights combing through it all, piecing together the story they wanted buried. And the deeper I went, the sicker I felt. They hadn't just broken her spirit, they had drained her dry. Every dollar I'd ever sent her, every cent of the savings she had before marrying Ethan, it was gone. Lavish dinners. New cars. Business investments under Ethan's name. Thousands of dollars poured into things Lily never saw, never agreed to, never even knew existed. They'd used her money to feed their empire. And when she had nothing left to give, they threw her away like she was worthless. But they had made one mistake. They underestimated me. I called James Whitaker again that morning. James, I said without preamble. I've got bank statements, transfer records, text messages, enough to prove they were financially exploiting her. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Slow down, he said. Bring everything. We'll go through it together. But Evelyn. I meant what I said before. This won't be easy. I don't want easy, I told him. I want justice. There was a low sigh. Then come by the office tomorrow morning. And Evelyn, be prepared to lose more than money before this is over. His words echoed in my head long after the call ended. Be prepared to lose more than money. I stared at the papers on my table. No, they had already taken enough. They weren't taking anything else. That afternoon, Daniel stopped by again. This time, he brought groceries and 2 cups of coffee. Looks like mission control in here, he said, glancing at the mountain of documents. Mission justice, I replied, sliding a stack toward him. See these withdrawals? Ethan transferred $15,000 out of Lily's account 2 weeks after their wedding. And another $8,000 here. Both times labeled investment. Daniel frowned. You think they were laundering her money? I think they were bleeding her dry and calling it marriage, I said. He shook his head. People like the Blackwells, they think rules don't apply to them. Half the department won't even look their way. I looked up sharply. What do you mean? Daniel hesitated. I shouldn't say this, but Richard Blackwell still plays golf with the police chief. And Margaret donates a fortune to the mayor's campaigns. If you're planning to fight them, you're going to need more than paperwork. His words didn't scare me. They fueled me. Then I'll bring more than paperwork, I said. I'll bring the truth. That evening, Daniel stayed for dinner. I cooked a simple stew, and we ate at the small table beside the window. Lily joined us, her hair brushed, her eyes a little less distant than before. She even managed a weak smile when Daniel made a joke about my cooking skills, or lack of them. For a moment, The world felt almost normal. Then, as he was leaving, Daniel knelt beside Lily's chair and handed her something small. A keychain, shaped like a Taekwondo uniform. "I saw it and thought of you," he said. "Your mom taught me that strength isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about standing up, even if your knees shake." Lily stared at the keychain, her lips trembling. A single tear slid down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. It was the first time I'd heard her say those words in weeks. Later that night, I found myself standing by her bedroom door, listening to her breathing. She was asleep, clutching that tiny keychain in her hand. And for the first time since I'd found her on that doorstep, I felt a flicker of hope. But the darkness wasn't done with us yet. At 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered groggily and froze. "Mrs. Carter," a man's voice drawled. "You're making a mistake." "Who is this?" "You're digging where you shouldn't. Stop now, or next time it won't just be a note under your door." The line went dead. I stared into the darkness of my apartment, my heart pounding. Fear clawed at my throat, but beneath it, something else rose stronger. Rage. They thought they could scare me. They thought they could silence me. But they had no idea who I was or how far I was willing to go. I walked to the kitchen table, stared down at the mountain of evidence I'd built, and whispered into the still night. "You started this war, Blackwells. And now, I'm coming for you." I barely slept after that phone call. Every creak of the apartment, every whisper of the wind outside made my skin prickle. I knew that voice wasn't bluffing. It wasn't a prank. It was a warning. A line drawn in the sand. But they'd underestimated one thing. I've already lost the one thing that mattered most. And when you've already lost everything, fear stops working. By sunrise, I'd made a decision. If they wanted to silence me, they'd have to do it while I was screaming. Lily was already awake when I stepped into the kitchen. She was sitting by the window, knees pulled up to her chest, the little keychain Daniel had given her dangling from her fingers. Her eyes were swollen from another night of nightmares. I poured us both coffee and sat across from her. "Did you sleep at all?" I asked. She shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them," she whispered. The way Ethan looked at me. Like I was a thing. Not a person. Just something to use. My chest tightened. I wanted to reach across the table and pull her into my arms, but I knew touch was still too much for her. Instead, I slid a small notebook toward her. "What's this?" she asked. "A place to start taking your voice back," I said. "Write down everything. Every memory, every detail. The good, the bad, the ones that keep you up at night. It's not for anyone else, it's for you. Because they don't get to own your story, Lily. You do." She stared at the notebook for a long time. Then, slowly, she opened it. Her hands trembled as she wrote the first words. I didn't peek. I didn't interrupt. I just watched as my daughter, broken, hollowed out, barely breathing, began to claw her way back from the darkness, one word at a time. That afternoon, James called me into his office. He had that cautious look on his face again, the one that said he didn't want to tell me what he was about to say. "They've filed for a restraining order," he said. "Against you." I blinked. "What?" "They're claiming harassment, defamation, threats. It's flimsy, but it's a classic power move. They want to make you look unstable before you can make a move against them." I laughed short, bitter. They groomed and abused my daughter, stole her money, and now they're painting me as the villain? James leaned forward. "This is how people like them operate. They've got money, lawyers, influence. They're going to try and bury you before you can stand up." I stared out his office window, my jaw clenched. "Then let them try," I said. "Because I'm not backing down." When I got home, Lily was sitting at the table again, but this time, she wasn't staring into space. She was writing. Pages and pages filled with words, tears staining the paper. When she noticed me, she hesitated, then handed the notebook over. "Do you want to read it?" she asked quietly. I nodded. The first page was shaky, hesitant. But by page 3, her words cut like knives. He told me I was nothing without him. They laughed when I cried. I thought love was supposed to feel safe. By the time I reached the last page, I was shaking with anger and pride. because these weren't just words. They were evidence. They were truth. They were the first bricks in the wall I was building to bring the Blackwells down. "You're brave," I whispered, handing the notebook back. "You have no idea how brave you are." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I don't feel brave. I feel broken." I knelt beside her and looked her straight in the eye. "Being broken isn't the end, Lily. It's the beginning. Every scar you have means you survived." That night, something changed. Lily asked if she could cook dinner. It was just pasta, overcooked and too salty, but it was the first time she'd wanted to do anything in weeks. And when we sat down to eat, she told me a story from her childhood I hadn't heard in years. For 2 hours, the shadows loosened their grip on her. And I realized something important. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow, painful climb. But every tiny step, every notebook page, every shared meal, every laugh is a victory. But peace never lasts long in a war. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, Lily, at 16, laughing in the park with her friends. On the back, one sentence was scrawled in red ink. "Stay quiet, or we'll remind the world who she really is." My hands shook as I stared at it. Not because I was scared, but because I understood exactly what this was. They were done warning me. Now they were threatening her. And that was the moment I stopped reacting. It was the moment I started planning. I walked into that courthouse like I was walking into a battlefield. The marble floors gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights, and the air smelled faintly of polish and anxiety. Every step echoed, a drumbeat reminding me the fight I'd begun was no longer just mine. It had become Lily's, and it was about to get ugly. I clutched my folder of evidence tightly, my fingers digging into the paper. Bank statements, emails, letters, everything we had compiled over weeks. This was the armor I had built. This was my sword. And I knew deep down that no amount of paper could prepare me for what was waiting inside. The courtroom door swung open, and there they were. The Blackwells. Richard Blackwell sat in the front row like a king surveying his kingdom. Margaret beside him, smiling that same cold, calculated smile. Ethan leaned back in his chair, arrogant, untouchable, like the world had been built just for him. Isabel, the sister, perched at the edge of the bench, her eyes glittering with malice. It was all theater. I knew it. But it didn't make my stomach stop twisting. Our lawyer, James Whitaker, stood tall beside me. His calm presence steadied me, though the tension in the room was electric. He had prepared us for this. Every witness, every piece of evidence, every argument, it was all ready. And yet, I could feel the Blackwells' power pressing down, invisible but suffocating. The trial began, and I listened as James laid out our case: financial exploitation, emotional abuse, and years of systematic control. He spoke clearly, methodically, like a chess player setting the board. But the Blackwells' legal team was no ordinary opponent. Their star witness, a former housekeeper, was brought in first. She was lazy, the woman said, her voice loud, rehearsed. Mrs. Lily would lock herself in her room all day. I had to do everything. My blood boiled. I leapt to my feet. "You're lying. My daughter was never like that." The judge banged his gavel. "Silence. This is a courtroom." I sat down, fury coiling inside me like a living thing. Even as I fought to control my voice, I noticed it, the subtle nod between Richard and the judge. The almost imperceptible glance, a quiet agreement that made my blood run cold. The game was rigged. Day after day, the trial continued. The housekeeper's lies stacked against Lily like bricks in a wall I was trying to break down. Every document I handed over was twisted, every testimony distorted. I watched the Blackwells smirk, their confidence growing with every word. And then there was Daniel. He had recorded the Blackwells on Christmas Eve, every cruel, venomous word they had spoken while leaving Lily on that porch. I had begged him to be careful, to make sure it didn't break any laws, but desperation had pushed him to do it anyway. I had hoped, prayed, that it would be the blow we needed. The day came when the recording was played in court. The room went silent as Ethan's words spilled into the air. "She's faking depression to dodge her duties." Richard's voice followed. "A daughter-in-law who can't have children? For miscarriages. Embarrassed us enough. My hands clenched in my lap. I wanted to run up, shake them, scream. But I stayed seated. I forced myself to breathe. This was evidence. This was the truth. And then, just like that, it was ripped away. Objection, the Blackwell's lawyer barked. Your Honor, this recording is illegal. Made without consent. Violates my client's privacy rights. The judge's gavel came down like a hammer to my chest. Objection sustained. The recording is inadmissible. Underscore 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 underscore. I felt my world tilt. All the evidence, all the painstaking work, stripped away in a heartbeat. I wanted to scream, to fight, to tear down those walls. But I couldn't. Not here. Not yet. I looked at Lily, sitting beside me, her face pale, but her hand gripping mine. She whispered, "Mom, don't give up." Not yet. Her words were a lifeline. Because even when the system turned against us, when justice seemed impossible, I realized something crucial. We were not alone. Not anymore. The Blackwells might have controlled the courtroom. They might have twisted the law in their favor. But they had not yet broken the one thing that mattered, Lily's truth, and the fire it had ignited inside me. As we left the courthouse that day, I took one final glance at the Blackwells. Their confidence was unshaken. Their smirks said, "We won. You lost." I clenched my fists and whispered under my breath, "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." And in that moment, I vowed I would find another way. Another battlefield. Another method to make them pay. Because the fight for Lily's life, her dignity, her soul, it had only just begun. They took the courtroom from us, but they couldn't steal the air. If law fenced me out, then we would take the fight where the law couldn't silence us, into the open. The judge banged his gavel. Silence. This is a courtroom. I sat down, fury coiling inside me like a living thing. Even as I fought to control my voice, I noticed it, the subtle nod between Richard and the judge. The almost imperceptible glance, a quiet agreement that made my blood run cold. The game was rigged. Day after day, the trial continued. The housekeeper's lies stacked against Lily like bricks in a wall I was trying to break down. Every document I handed over was twisted, every testimony distorted. I watched the Blackwells smirk, their confidence growing with every word. And then there was Daniel. He had recorded the Blackwells on Christmas Eve, every cruel, venomous word they had spoken while leaving Lily on that porch. I had begged him to be careful, to make sure it didn't break any laws, but desperation had pushed him to do it anyway. I had hoped, prayed, that it would be the blow we needed. The day came when the recording was played in court. The room went silent as Ethan's words spilled into the air. "She's faking depression to dodge her duties." Richard's voice followed. "A daughter-in-law who can't have children? For miscarriages. Embarrassed us enough." My hands clenched in my lap. I wanted to run up, shake them, scream. But I stayed seated. I forced myself to breathe. This was evidence. This was the truth. And then, just like that, it was ripped away. Objection, the Blackwell's lawyer barked. "Your Honor, this recording is illegal. Made without consent. Violates my client's privacy rights." The judge's gavel came down like a hammer to my chest. Objection sustained. The recording is inadmissible. I felt my world tilt. All the evidence, all the painstaking work, stripped away in a heartbeat. I wanted to scream, to fight, to tear down those walls. But I couldn't. Not here. Not yet. I looked at Lily, sitting beside me, her face pale, but her hand gripping mine. She whispered, "Mom, don't give up." Not yet. Her words were a lifeline. Because even when the system turned against us, when justice seemed impossible, I realized something crucial. We were not alone. Not anymore. The Blackwells might have controlled the courtroom. They might have twisted the law in their favor. But they had not yet broken the one thing that mattered, Lily's truth, and the fire it had ignited inside me. As we left the courthouse that day, I took one final glance at the Blackwells. Their confidence was unshaken. Their smirk said, "We won. You lost." I clenched my fists and whispered under my breath, "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." And in that moment, I vowed I would find another way, another battlefield, another method to make them pay. Because the fight for Lily's life, her dignity, her soul, it had only just begun. They took the courtroom from us, but they couldn't steal the air. If law fenced me out, then we would take the fight where the law couldn't silence us, into the open. When the judge slammed the gavel and declared Daniel's recording inadmissible, something cold and empty opened in my chest. For a second I sat there, stunned, as if someone had removed the floor beneath me. The words in that tape, Ethan's sneer, Richard's contempt, Margaret's clipped laughter, had been the hard, undeniable proof of what Lily lived with. To have it struck down felt like watching a rope fray when the noose was already in place. But Daniel didn't fold. He looked at me across the bench, eyes burning with a reckless sort of conviction. He mouthed one word, "Listen." Outside the courthouse, the public had already gathered, cameras, phones, neighbors craning their necks. News vans idled at the curb like sharks. The Blackwells had the judge and the law. We had the living, breathing world that lived beyond marble walls and black robes. That evening, we made a choice. Not because it was easy, but because silence had been the Blackwells' favorite weapon. Daniel slipped me a thumb drive like a talisman. "We'll post it," he said. "Not in court. Not for the judge. For everyone else." I wanted to tell him the legal risks, to calculate every possible blowback. But there are moments when calculation is cowardice. Lily had sat on the porch and shivered because men we trusted deemed her disposable. If the world heard what they said, maybe the world would not let them sweep it away. We posted it at midnight. A short clip first, the sharpest lines, Ethan's voice, Richard's laugh. Then the full recording, unedited. We didn't add commentary. We let the voices speak for themselves. The reaction was seismic. Phones buzzed. Notifications stacked. Half the city was awake, watching a family's private cruelty unfold in living rooms and bars and late-night kitchens. Blackwell's exposed trended within an hour. Clips were shared, remixed, captioned with anger. Comments poured in like rain, disbelief, fury, accusations. People who had never known Lily's name suddenly felt a righteous sting. For a breathless day and a night after, it felt like we had finally been seen. Local news anchors replayed the worst lines in slow, stunned tones. An op-ed columnist wrote a scathing piece about power and privilege in Boise. Church groups and neighborhood forums lit up with messages of support. Someone started a hashtag listen to Lily, and it caught like wildfire. I watched Lily at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug, eyes tracking the unfolding outrage. For the first time since I'd carried her off that porch, she let herself sink into something that looked like relief. People were angry for her. Strangers were angry for her. The world had been given a choice: ignore cruelty or name it out loud. But the Blackwells reacted the way all kings with shaky crowns do, by swinging their weight. Within 48 hours, their lawyers filed a motion demanding the recording be taken down, calling it an illegal invasion of privacy, slander, and a breach of civil law. They issued a letter to every newsroom that had played the audio, threatening defamation suits and injunctions. The Blackwells didn't ask for silence. They demanded it. And the city, the same city whose people had just been clutching their phones in outrage, began to twitch. A prominent local station complied and pulled the clip. A legal blog wrote about the fine line between evidence and illegality. Commentary shifted. Suddenly we were no longer telling the story of a hurt woman. We were embroiled in a debate about method, about consent, about whether truth could be aired if it had been captured in the wrong way. It was the precise, ugly pivot I'd seen before in the judge's half-smile. Facts didn't matter if you could reframe the conversation. The Blackwells had money to hire people who could redirect attention, spin doubt, and make the victim seem like the aggressor. Then came the threats, not the oblique, anonymous kind that had slid under my door, but open, precise demands from the Blackwells Council. Take the recordings down. Publicly apologize. Withdraw our statements. or face litigation that would drag Lily into the mud on multiple fronts. Lily turned the pages of her notebook like someone trying to read a map out of fog. She looked smaller and braver at the same time. "Mom," she said quietly, "if they tear us apart in the papers, will people still believe me?" "People who matter already do," I told her. "But I won't let them bury you to make a point." Daniel arranged for extra patrols around my building that night. He came by with a thermos of coffee and a look that said he'd sleep when our fight was over. We talked strategy. We spoke with a sympathetic journalist willing to keep the piece running despite pressure. We prepared to counter lawsuits with public testimony and to put our truth in places the Blackwells couldn't bulldoze overnight. But there's a cost to shouting at giants. The more noise you make, the more you invite a response calibrated to silence you. An old friend of mine called that morning to warn me, when the powerful are cornered, they use every tool. Your daughter's name will be dragged through the mud to protect theirs. He was not being paranoid. 2 days after the recording went viral, a printed piece arrived at our door. It was a glossy pamphlet distributed anonymously around town. On the front was a grainy photo of Lily at a younger age, candid, laughing. Under it, a smear of a headline, "Who is Lily Blackwell Reyes? The other stories no one is telling." Inside, petty allegations were spread like breadcrumbs, accusations about youth, about mistakes, about things that were not crimes but could be painted as impropriety. The Blackwells team didn't need to prove a thing, they only had to seed doubt. I felt my hands go ice cold as I read. They were playing for more than a courtroom. They were playing to rewrite the narrative, to make her the problem. That night, Lily curled up on the couch and pressed her forehead to the keychain Daniel had given her, as if it were a talisman against the storm. "Mom," she whispered, "I don't want to be famous. I don't want all these people watching me." "Then we'll change what they watch," I said. "We'll show them the truth, piece by painful piece. If they want to tear us down, then they'll have to show their hands." When I stepped outside for air, the city smelled different, like snow and smoke, like something burning, but not yet burned to ash. A neighbor yelled from across the street, "You okay, Evelyn? That family's making waves." There was pity in the voice and a thread of fear. I looked up at the black sky and thought about the judge's gavel, about the spin, about the pamphlets. Power had more than one face. It had the face of law, and the face of money, and the face of fear. But every one of those faces showed a crack the more people peered at them. We had made the recording public. The truth had been heard. The court had refused to listen, but the city, for a brief, shining interval, had. And in war, a battlefield can shift. If the courthouse closed its doors, then the court of public opinion could be opened. If the Blackwells had influence inside buildings with marble columns, we had the messy, uncontrollable force of hundreds of small voices, people who would not let cruelty be sanitized. Still, I couldn't ignore a gnawing dread. Making it public had cost us something. It had bought attention, but also opened Lily up to a new kind of attack. I sat with that trade-off like a heavy stone in my lap. "We might be winning hearts," Daniel said quietly as he left that night, "but they know how to weaponize any win against us." "Then we'll brace," I said. "And then we'll strike where they can't defend." I went to bed with a plan forming in my head, one that would not rely on a judge's permission or a news anchor's bravery. I would find witnesses. I would find paper trails so sharp they would cut through spin. I would make the Blackwells so visible that their own hands would betray them. Because truths, even when unheard by a court, have weight. And once people hear enough small truths stacked together, even the richest lies begin to sink. The courthouse smelled like paper and cold breath and the small, clinical cruelty of officialdom. I'd been in worse rooms, fought harder fights, but nothing had prepared me for the way the law could be polite and poisonous at once. The day the verdict came, the ceiling felt lower. Lily sat beside me, clutching her notebook like a rosary. James had done everything he could, every witness, every document, every quiet plea. But I had watched the system bend and bow to the Blackwells for weeks now. I knew how their influence worked. A favor here, a donation there, a phone call that slid like oil into a hinge. Power moves quietly and then pretends to be surprised when anyone notices. The judge read the decision with the sterile calm of a man announcing the weather. He used the words we have all learned to memorize in courtrooms after considering all evidence. He said them like a benediction, like a finality. But his after considering felt hollow. I heard the echo of the Blackwell's money and status behind it. Divorce granted. Claims of abuse dismissed for insufficient evidence. Custody of their life's shared property, the lion's share awarded to Ethan Blackwell. The sound of the gavel was a crack of thunder. For a second there was only noise, the rustle of papers, the soft whimper from someone in the gallery, the snap of a camera shutter. People who had watched us fight with hearts in their throats stared now with something like pity and a slow, simmering anger. Ethan's face was carved into smugness. Richard's posture was that of a man who had been justified by the universe. Margaret's smile was a blade with a ribbon around it. Isabel clapped quietly, as if feminine restraint were the final insult. And then he leaned forward, Ethan, close enough that his whisper should have been lost in the room's buzz, but it landed on me like a thrown stone. "See, Evelyn," he said, low and venomous. "I told you not to meddle. You get nothing. You're just a useless old woman. That's all you are." The words were meant for me, but they were pitched to wound Lily as well. A last, petty attempt to stamp us into smallness. I felt something in me uncoil. All the fighting, all the sleepless planning, every protective move I'd made for this girl who had once been my girl, they had led to this. A man who'd left my daughter to freeze had just been handed a windfall. For a beat I saw only red, the reflex of the coach, the habit of a lifetime of striking first if it meant saving someone I loved. I wanted to stand and make him take it back. I wanted to set the room on fire with my disgust. Lily's hand tightened around mine. She turned to me, voice a raw, brittle thing. "Mom," she whispered, "please." "No, not now." Her eyes were wide and exhausted. She had seen what violence did to people. She had seen the way revenge could hollow you out until you were nothing but the echo of someone else's anger. I wanted to argue, to say that violence was sometimes the only language power understood. But there she was, the child I'd carried, who had been discarded by a family wrapped in velvet, asking me to stop. That was the moment the volcano inside me found a fault line. It didn't mean I would stop fighting. It meant I had to find a different way. As we rose to leave, a ripple of chaos pressed around us. A group of reporters crowded the hallway, lenses and microphones thrust forward like hungry birds. People in the gallery whispered and pointed. One of the Blackwell's legal aides, smug and efficient, smirked as he passed us. "Enjoy the winter," he said to Lily, not quite loud enough for legal trouble, but loud enough for cruelty. A man in a suit, someone from the Preston, no, the Blackwell inner orbit, pushed through and murmured to a cameraman, "Make sure you get her face as she walks out. Let the crowd see what happens to ungrateful girls." The words hit like thrown pebbles into a pond, and the pond rippled outward quickly. That's when it happened. Ethan, who until now had worn the armor of privilege, glanced at Lily and slipped a final taunt toward me. It was personal, whispered close, a dagger meant to cut and leave no scar for the world to see. "Good luck finding justice now, Evelyn," he said. "You should have stayed in your lane." My hand moved before my brain finished forming the decision. I stood. My body moved like the old days on the mat, fast, precise, a line between intention and action. I crossed the small expanse of floor separating us. I saw the shock in his eyes at that sudden movement, like a lion seeing a dog lunge. If I had struck him then, the room would have lost its composure. I would have been arrested. Headlines would have screamed that the crazed mother attacked the innocent husband. The Blackwells would have a new narrative, a shiny new shard of proof that I was unstable. They would have fed it to the press like a sermon. Before my fist connected with air, Daniel intercepted me. He stepped between us with a force that surprised me, not physically immense, but quietly unbreakable. He put his body in front of mine and said, "Evelyn, stop." His voice was steady and clipped, a policeman's delivery. His eyes were a harbor of containment. He didn't chastise me so much as hold me accountable. He was angry. I could feel it like electricity. But he also understood the stakes in a way my heart didn't. He understood that some battles are won without bloodshed because the cost of that blood would be more than anyone could carry. There was a second where the entire hallway seemed to hold its breath. Reporters fumbled with their equipment. A few people applauded quietly at the restraint, as if civility itself were a victory. Lily pressed her forehead to my arm. "No more," she whispered. "I don't want to become him." And in that whisper, more pleading than command, she anchored me. We left the courthouse with our heads held by a strange mixture of defeat and stubborn pride. The world outside was cold and bright. Snow lay in clean drifts on the lawn, indifferent to verdicts and vendettas. But the volcano hadn't cooled. It had shifted. The lava that had threatened to explode outward now flowed inward, collecting heat, becoming molten strategy. I had been inches from doing something that would hand them a victory they could brand as moral righteousness. That was not bravery, that was feeding their machine. So I made a vow, a quieter, colder vow than the one I had shouted through their broken door. I would not give them the satisfaction. I would not become the monster they needed me to be to prove their point. I would be smarter. I would be more patient. I would use every law they thought protected them, every human witness they thought they'd buried, every piece of paper and every voice in the city until their fortress had no dry wood left to burn. When we stepped into the light, Daniel leaned close and said, "We start anew. Not with punches, Evelyn. With pressure. With people." I looked at Lily, at the way she held herself with brittle courage, at the small keychain that dangled like a promise, and I let the volcanic heat turn into something I could use. Focus. Strategy. A slow burn that would leave nothing but scorched foundations. The Blackwells had won the courtroom. They had not and would not own our lives. Not yet. We walked away from the courthouse with nothing but our names, our truth, and the sense that the real fight, the one that didn't end with a gavel, was just beginning. The court had failed us. The law had turned its back, the gavel had fallen, and the Blackwells had left with their victory stamped on every ledger and property deed. But outside those marble walls, a storm was quietly gathering. It began with a single clip, Lily's voice, trembling and raw, pleading for peace in that courtroom hallway. Daniel had managed to record it before cameras were shoved aside. At first, it was just a whisper on social media, a tiny ember flickering in the dark. But embers have a way of catching, and within hours, it ignited. People started sharing it. Retweeting, reposting, commenting. "This isn't just a family dispute," one post read. "This is abuse, plain and simple. Hashtag justice for Lily." The hashtag spread like wildfire, growing in strength with every share. We watched the numbers climb in stunned silence. Lily, curled on the couch, held her keychain tightly. "Mom, people are seeing me," she whispered, as if afraid to believe it. "Yes," I said softly. "And they're angry. And anger can move mountains." By midday, local news picked up the story. The clip aired on the 6 o'clock news. Headlines flashed across screens. Abuse behind closed doors. The Blackwell family exposed. Talk shows discussed it. Neighbors whispered in coffee shops. Everywhere we turned, someone had watched, shared, or commented. And the Blackwells, the family that had controlled the courtroom like it was their living room, were losing the one thing that mattered most to them, their untouchable image. Margaret Blackwell's smug smile had begun to crack. Richard's calm confidence wavered as reporters cornered them outside their estate. Ethan tried to laugh it off in public appearances, but the laughter sounded hollow. Isabel's clipped words of charm now sounded desperate and rehearsed. Power, it turns out, is fragile. And while money can buy many things, it cannot buy public conscience. But with public attention came new risks. Threats and scrutiny arrived in equal measure. Anonymous messages flooded our inbox. "Stop this now, or it will be worse." Flyers appeared in the neighborhood, painting Lily in a false, twisted light. The Blackwells were striking back, using their influence, using fear, using everything they could. I looked at Lily. Her eyes were wide, her hands trembling around her coffee mug. "Mom, I didn't ask for this. I just wanted to live my life." "I know," I said, my voice steady. "But now the world knows the truth, too. You are no longer invisible. We used the moment carefully. Daniel coordinated interviews with journalists who were willing to protect Lily's identity while telling her story. Local forums and groups erupted in outrage. Every act of cruelty the Blackwells had committed came under scrutiny. Social media amplified every injustice they had hoped to keep hidden. The Blackwells, who had built their empire on reputation and fear, were now cornered. They were forced to respond, forced to show up in public, forced to look like ordinary humans rather than untouchable titans. And every step they took under the watchful eyes of the city chipped away at their power. That night, Lily and I sat together on the couch, watching notifications flood our phones. The world was angry, yes, but it was also watching, listening, and believing. "I don't feel safe yet," she said quietly. "But I feel like maybe I have a chance." "Yes," I said, placing my hand over hers. "You do. And this time, we're fighting on a battlefield they cannot control." The court failed, the gavel fell, but the world is not theirs. I looked out the window at the city lights, glittering in the dark like a million tiny witnesses. This was no longer a story about one family, one fight, one injustice. This was a movement, fueled by truth, resilience, and the courage of a girl who refused to stay silent. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the Blackwell's fortress of power was starting to crumble. We had lost the courtroom, yes, but we were winning hearts. And sometimes, hearts are stronger than law. Spring arrived in Boise like it had been waiting just for us. The snow melted quietly, leaving the streets damp and glinting, the air smelling faintly of earth and renewal. For the first time in months, the weight pressing on my chest seemed lighter. The Blackwells were still powerful, still present, but their walls were cracking. And more importantly, Lily was beginning to breathe again. She laughed that morning, a small, hesitant sound, but real. I watched her from the kitchen doorway, sunlight catching her hair, her shoulders no longer hunched like they carried the world's cruelty. She had begun to reclaim herself, piece by piece, word by word, day by day. We walked together through a small park that afternoon. Daniel accompanied us, keeping a quiet watch. The grass was still patchy, the trees just budding, but it felt like freedom. Lily held my hand loosely, glancing up at me with something like hope in her eyes. "Mom," she said, voice trembling slightly, I might never be able to have kids. If that disappoints you." I stopped mid-step, the sun catching the lines of her face. "Lily," I said softly, taking her hands in mine, "that doesn't matter. You are already my family. You are already loved. That's enough." Her lips quivered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "But I always thought I had to be perfect to deserve that love." "You never did," I whispered. "You just had to survive. And you did. That's why you're here, with me, breathing, standing, alive. That's the victory." Daniel smiled quietly from a few steps away. His own quiet strength had become a part of our world, not just a shield, but a reminder that love and loyalty could be as fierce as any fight. We found a bench under a budding cherry tree, the branches spilling delicate pink petals into the breeze. Lily sat between us, the keychain Daniel had given her dangling from her fingers like a small talisman against the past. I looked at her and then at Daniel. "We made it," I said, voice low but steady. "The court didn't give it to us. The law failed. But we made it happen anyway." Lily laughed softly, a sound I thought I'd never hear again. "We did. Together." And for the first time since that Christmas Eve when I found her on the porch, I allowed myself to let go, just a little. The rage, the fear, the exhaustion. They were still there, lurking, but they no longer controlled us. We had lost battles, yes, but we had won the war that mattered. The one where the rules weren't written by judges or moneyed men, but by resilience, by love, and by refusing to let cruelty define our lives. I took a deep breath, feeling the spring air fill my lungs, and I let myself smile. Not the sharp, defensive smile I'd worn for months, but a quiet, soft one, the kind that comes from knowing the fight is not over, but that you are no longer losing. That night, I watched Lily asleep in her room, notebook by her side, the keychain shining faintly in the moonlight. I whispered a promise, more to myself than to her. They took her home. They took her money. They tried to take her voice. But they could never take her strength. And in the end, that is the only victory that matters. I turned off the light, feeling the warmth of a life slowly reclaimed. Outside, the city continued, indifferent yet alive. Inside, we had found something the Blackwells could never touch: peace, love, and the knowledge that we had survived and thrived. For Lily, for me, for everyone who had been told they were too weak to fight. We had survived. And that was enough. The court might have failed us, but the world didn't. If you've ever felt invisible or had to fight to be seen, this story is for you, and this is the story of how I fought for my daughter's life. If you want to see how this battle unfolds, like this video and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? Your voice matters.